Hey everybody, this is Dave. Here's Bob
Ahoy.
saying that, and we're going to talk about part 5, Imposters. I changed it up again, Bob. Let's talk about a couple of things before we get into this episode. One is a big dum-dum thing that I've never done. Ready? Hey, everybody listening, could you please, rate this or share it if you like it on Twitter or subscribe, follow on Twitter. We're at Malarkey FM. Bob, you've got the YouTube side of this.
Yes. I don't even know what it's called, though. It's Malarkey FM Podcast.
Pros.
There are about 7 different Malarkey podcasts.
Shh, don't worry about that. This idea is old, and we're the only one that matters.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. All right. Follow up. So last week, Bob, I had a continuing discussion with myself and you about swearing in Star Trek. And your point was, do you know where I'm going with this?
No, go.
Your point was that the swearing it was more appropriate for, say, Patrick Stewart in 2023 than Jean-Luc Picard in universe. And I happened to find a tweet from Christopher Monfils, who works on Picard, who says, and I'm going to quote him here, "It was an improv from Patrick himself, who guards JL's dialogue fiercely, moved to use that word in a moment of raw honesty." And that means hashtag Bob was right. Well done.
That's right. Bring it. Now, the only caveat there is, as your tweeter is explaining, That's
a word. That's a phrase you've just used.
It's the little tiny part on a speaker.
My tweeter.
He's claiming, though, that Patrick Stewart is basically the oracle of what Jean-Luc Picard says, which probably is not accurate. But
no.
Yeah.
I mean, he probably has an excellent idea, but it doesn't make him always right.
Yeah.
I'm not even always right. All right, last time, let's do the watch through of Star Trek Picard. Last time, where were we? The good guys had won. There were some space babies born, and the Shrike, which is, the alien vessel helmed by a changeling, weirdly named, I've thought this 400 times, weirdly that alien vessel is named after an Earth bird. It was disabled, at least temporarily, and we know that Frontier Day is coming up. Is that what it's called? I get this wrong all the time. No, it's Frontier Day. That's coming up. Oh boy, we're going to talk about that. That's going to be exciting. So we start with another one of Jack's dreams or hallucinations. I'm not sure what they are, but he's dressed in a Starfleet uniform and he shoots and kills everyone on the bridge. And somebody at the end says, "I know what you really are." And so we get that same imagery that we've been seeing for several episodes now, where like there's red root-like things that spread over now people's faces, and
there's a red door.
Yes. And Jack wakes up, shaking in his bed, and it is very clearly to me at this point that it's Beverly's voice talking in those dreams. Not sure what that means, or those hallucinations, but she says, "Jack, come home." I think that the voice is becoming clearer every time these things happen. I don't know why.
At what point in this scene did you suspect that it may be a dream or a vision?
I don't know. I thought, well, maybe at first, because why would he be dressed like that?
I can tell you the exact moment and I just know this because I put a little recorder on myself when I watched the episode last night in case anything exciting happened.
Oh, good.
And, it's me, my wife, and my young son, and we're sitting there, and it's one of the first shots. It's sort of, I believe it starts with Ensign LaForge's fingers on her LCARS panel there, on her console, and it sort of tilts up to her face, and she yawns.
Huh.
And then in the background, out of focus, I think the turbo lift opens, and you see Jack, or you see somebody come out that we see as Jack. And for whatever reason, we had just watched a certain YouTube channel's breakdown of all the Nightmare on Elm Street videos, films.
Drink.
We had just watched a certain YouTube channel break down all the Nightmare on Elm Street films.
RLM.
And I just immediately said, "Oh, Freddy's gonna get you," or something like that. I don't know why. I just thought that meant if someone yawns, it means that they're in a dream. But they were. I will say, I was very delighted that at the end of that scene, instead of Jack waking up, it didn't cut to a title card that said
5 years earlier.
That or like 24 hours earlier.
Yeah.
I was really worried that this was going to be like the Lost template for every single episode.
There's an episode of Firefly that does that. It was one of the unaired ones with the
or was it Out of Gas?
It was Out of Gas. Maybe it wasn't one of the unaired ones.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Out of Gas does that, where it starts at the end and then tells it back to the beginning. I think that's interesting, but maybe shouldn't be a crutch for everything. I heard Dan Harmon, my beloved Dan Harmon of Community, my favorite probably show of all time. His criticism of that was like, why not just start with the story when the story starts? And I thought, well, that's a pretty good argument.
Yeah, I mean, Lost was clever when it did it at first, but as you and I know, I sort of rage quit Lost at some point. Because it was just too frustrating and unfulfilling of a viewing experience for me. You stayed a huge fan all the way through. Yeah. And remember, I mentioned in a previous podcast, Battlestar Galactica did something, got to a point where they were doing it constantly too.
That's the one I rage quit, so I don't remember tons of Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, it's funny. I never made it to the end of. I basically sort of petered out in the middle of the final season, and always intending to watch the end, but it's been how many years has it been now? Like 15 years at this point, so maybe I'm not going to go back, and I don't know, maybe I should go back and watch, but
we'll get right on that. Maybe we'll stick a pin in that one, Bob. Who knows?
Oh, yes, you're right. Fortune and Glory.
They had a plan, but I think they maybe didn't have a plan, is the thing.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Hey, speaking of Lost.
This whole idea of sort of story structure, sort of very visible story structure, reminds me of a related topic that I think everyone listening can understand.
Here it comes.
Stephen Sondheim.
What?
The great American musical composer and writer, lyricist, Stephen Sondheim, talking about the kind of musicals that were popular in the 80s, something like Les Miserables, where there's not a lot of good individual songs. They just sort of sing from start to finish. It's not your classic sort of musical play where there's a book, there's dialogue, there's scenes, and then there are occasional, hopefully very good songs in the proceeding. And I was watching some interview and someone asked him about this, and Sondheim said it's very easy to just sort of write music that doesn't stop for 2 or 3 hours, but it's very hard to write 5 or 6 amazing, memorable songs.
Yeah, dude. You know what that reminds me of is Rent, which I think a lot of people love, and the music, almost none of the music does anything for me. And it should more or less be music that, like, it's rock stuff. It should do it for me, but I always, that is exactly the way I felt about Rent and was never able to articulate, which is they're just singing, and like when you're, it's singing as prose, not poetry. Oh, yes, that's good.
Very good.
Write that down. I'm gonna write that down.
And so that maybe there's something to that about these sort of very on the nose story structure attempts where it's very hard to write a good dramatic episode of TV, but it's probably much easier to say, well, I'm going to impart some kind of significance to this story by also relating it to a very convenient thing that happened in the past that is explicitly applicable to what's going on right now.
Yeah.
But luckily that did not happen this time.
No, which is fine by me because I liked it, but I like that they also flex their muscles and don't have to do that every time. Yeah. There's a beautiful shot after this this Jack Come Home scene, which is just from space, and you see the Titan wounded, and there's all of these. Did you notice this? All of these little sort of robots clearly repairing the thing. You know, they're sitting out in Federation space at this point, and I kind of loved the. We can dwell on it from a safe distance. We don't have to see. I believe it was in Discovery at one point. Star Warsy happy robots cleaning it. It's just kind of a pretty idea of that happening.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if they were and like you said, it was so far away. I wasn't sure. Are they robots? Is it the crew like in, EVA suits, and are they all working on the saucer and that sort of thing?
I think there are at least a few people out there, because you can see in the shot, what would you call it? A little flashlight on a miner's helmet, that sort of thing happening, and you can see him, I think, walking. It's fair to say on the saucer section. So that's pretty cool.
Can I bring up a minor nitpick of the effects?
Sure.
In this sort of current generation of Trek. All of this is way better than the first 2 seasons of Picard, way better than Discovery. Not a fan of this new Kurtzman Trek era, but I am digging this season 5 of Picard. Something weird about the effects, though. They almost have this, I don't know, and you tell me if I'm crazy. Does it seem like sometimes the texturing of the ships sort of veers a little close to that sort of mid-90s Babylon 5, like plastic.
They are sometimes too clean, is what it looks like. Not always, but sometimes it feels like that to me.
I don't necessarily mind the clean, because the way that the ships looked in, say, the Kirk era motion pictures, or even TNG.
I mean, texture-wise clean.
Yeah.
Right? There's a thing you can't screw up when you're shooting a model. Like, light the model right, and you're shooting actual physical things. The idea in CG is to recreate that, and sometimes when I say clean, what I mean is it doesn't quite look like an actual thing.
There's Adam Savage. He was on Mythbusters, and he has his own YouTube presence and all that. And he worked for ILM, and he's done model work for ILM. And I think he worked specifically, I know he worked on Galaxy Quest, and I think he worked on the prequels too. He had a great line that he said that he and I think some other people at ILM would say, which is Star Wars is dystopia and Star Trek is utopia.
For sure.
So, Star Wars has that lived-in grungy, the parts all do weird things, and maybe there's a missing sort of, nerdy part that should be there. And Star Trek, everything's perfect and clean and fits together perfectly and smooth.
Yeah, clean was what I intended to say, but you could definitely take it the wrong way. I mean, plasticky is probably the word that you already used it, and it was right. Something not quite right.
But think of that explicit texture from Babylon 5 that I used to use these textures back in the day. It's probably like graypanels.iff or something like that. It's that, can you picture that sort of gray and blue look on Babylon 5 that sort of has those sort of old, sort of outdated looking gray weathered panels? Yeah. And that's almost what the textures look like on these ships to me sometimes, which is weird. Just seems a little gray and a little beat up, which is kind of weird for Star Trek.
Well, I mean, in this case, it would be beat up because they just did the battle with the Shrike. But I take your point. We go to the ready room. You know what has occurred to me? I may have watched on Wednesday night, which I had bizarrely free. I may have watched all 4 episodes of the season back to back. Yeah, I'm hooked. One thing occurred to me while I was doing this is that this is kind of the Riker spin-off show that never happened. I really love the idea that Riker takes command on a new level, which I'm not sure I appreciated before, which is, we're seeing the guy get to do the thing. There's some changeling rules that they talk about in the ready room, just to establish what the rule is so that they can break the rules later, right? Changelings can't mimic internal physiology. Womp womp. And 7 says that everybody who comes aboard is scanned, so they'd for sure catch a changeling. Womp womp. It does answer the question, how did a changeling get on this ship? We talked about this last episode before Riker and Picard did.
Though not necessarily why.
Correct. Or how, right? How did they get the heads up that this was... Again, I still have not worked out if the changeling got there before Riker and Picard. So there's that scene in episode 1, the first scene, I guess, in Guinan's bar, where Riker and Picard meet and they leave on their mission, and the dude sitting at the bar, there's a conspicuous shot of dude sitting in a bar. throws the model of the Enterprise D in the glass, in the liquid in the glass. And it's clear that that guy was a spy. Riker didn't say, I'm on my way to the Titan, but he just said, I have a plan. So there's at least some connective tissue there. But what we know is that the changelings anticipated or knew that Riker and Picard would wind up on the Titan, and then somehow got a changeling on the Titan even before. He was standing there. The guy who wound up being the initial changeling was standing there in the hallway when Riker and Picard arrived in episode 1. So all of their changeling detection apparatus failed.
Yeah, and I suppose as we find out later in this episode, there may be more widespread changeling infiltration in Starfleet as a whole. So it's possible maybe every ship has changelings on it.
Yeah. Shaw reinstates by knighting 7, which is nice. Shaw says, oh, by the way, Starfleet's already on the way. And he steps outside after Riker relinquishes command back to Shaw. And Picard offers to take the blame for the whole situation. This picks up on the thread at the end of last episode where Deanna, not Diana, says, are you guys in trouble? to Riker. Of course they're going to be in trouble. Even if everything was great, they were going to be in trouble, but it wouldn't be the first time. I enjoy Shaw even when he's being a jerk for not great reasons to people I like more than him. I am constantly amused. Please give me a Shaw and 7 show at some point. Thank you.
He's great, but it is a little bit like sort of, I don't know, it seems a little bit like Robert Downey Jr., especially as Iron Man has been deposited into the Star Trek universe and is aware that he does not belong there.
He's good enough. See, this is what I'm saying. This is how you can call me a hypocrite, which is fine. But here's how I live with myself, which is, well, he's so good. I'll take it.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Yeah, so we have a meeting with Picard and Beverly and Jack where Picard basically says, we may be parting here, but I would love to be a part of your life. Beverly's like, yeah, it's not over. And she wants to look at that changeling body. And then Picard gives a straight recruitment pitch to Jack, which harkens back to the beginning of the episode teaser when he's dressed up in a uniform. And Picard's sad that Jack says no, sort of almost says something, but doesn't. Picard gives hey, good job, writers. Picard says Starfleet's an organization built on the ideals of reason, which is exactly what Starfleet is, by the way.
It's this new thing in this new modern Trek, specifically Picard, where, say, 7 and now Jack, could potentially join Starfleet. My impression of Starfleet always was that it was like trying to get into the Naval Academy, but like 100 times harder, and that you had to be one of these people who were driven from like age 6. You know what I mean? And you're spending your entire life getting straight A's and being in 10 organizations and being a model leader. It seems a little weird that also you could be like, and you're a smuggler, but you're my son, so maybe you could, sure, become a captain of a starship in 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, I don't know how that works, but I take your point.
Yeah.
Jack shares a look with that woman from his dream. She's got a shaved head and communications officer Ensign Kova Rin Esmar. So
my Lord.
What I'm gonna call her.
Okay, so this scene where they're in the hallway, it was kind of strange because it didn't really have that blocking in business that we talked about, where you sort of have to have people doing something. They're basically just standing in this really nice hallway set. It does look cool. It's a pretty cool looking shot where you're sort of looking down the hall, and maybe the hall is kind of hazed up a little bit. It just looks kind of neat. And then I realized this is where they recorded, I think, all of their promotional interviews for this season. Before the season came out, this shot was what they were using. So I wonder what came first. This is one of these chicken and the egg things. Did they like how this scene looked, and then they said, we're going to record all of our interviews right here?
It is nice. I mean, it's got those shiny black floors that you don't love.
It does look a little more Death Star than, cozy.
It's true.
cozy Enterprise.
It's not, you mean the hallways are wide and not carpeted?
Yeah.
Oh, our next scene brings Raffi and Worf back. They're on Raffi's ship, I believe it is, and they're fighting, and it doesn't end in a stalemate, but it's close. I think the point of that is basically Raffi's good. Like, the point of Worf has sort of always been, oh, this is a red letter media point. Drink. I thought I was being original, and then I realized this came from Rich or Mike or both, which is the point of Worf a lot of the time was to get beat up by the strong guest star so that you could prove that the strong guest star was very strong. And I think he's sort of having that effect here with Raffi, which it's also foreshadowing, but Raffi's good is the point of that. The phone rings and Worf's unseen handler, listen, here's the rule. If you communicate by text, the person behind the text is someone we know.
It's going to be a surprise guest star.
They have been denied access to Daystrom Station. That's where they thought they were going. That was their trajectory out of the last episode. So they've been denied access, and Worf assumes that the denial comes from, higher than the handler. And they establish the rules of Daystrom Station, which is we can't break in because it has this sophisticated AI security system that requires authorization from Starfleet Command. We're going to get into why that's a problem later. But weirdly, somehow the ragtag bad guys from District 6 on Metalis Prime, I believe it is, got in. So clearly they had a way to bypass, or they had the authorization, right? This is where we learn of Kryn, who is a new bad guy.
Before we move on, we have to have a moment of thanks that we get Worf getting denied. Have you ever watched any of those supercuts on YouTube?
Oh,
Captain,
yeah.
I recommend that we raise shields. No, Mr. Worf. Captain, I recommend we go to Red Alert. Denied, Mr. Worf. That's all he did in the original series was get beat up.
He was the guy who just to say the wrong thing to do. He gets pissed off in this scene, Worf, and he throws a knife at one point at Raffi and says, "Do not presume to know what I have and have not sacrificed for this." He's playing the part of Qui-Gon Jinn in Picard. He'll do that later pretty closely. So this is I trust these writers enough to think this is coming back and that this is a clue to Worf's backstory, like Riker's, one-off line about how his family would enjoy some time away from him was. So, they'll bring back the no longer child actor who played Alexander or something. I don't know. It's coming. Something is.
I think Metalis has joked about Alexander on Twitter. So, I mean, I almost got the point. Like he was just like, oh, he fell into a black hole or something.
Well,
sure. I don't think that's what he said. But yeah, I do wonder if whatever happened with that thread. It's funny. I remember the beginning of TNG but I don't remember the end of TNG well. Worf's half Klingon, half human wife, girlfriend, Alexander's mother. She's dead, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Rip.
I
want to point out something that I don't think I knew or I missed before, which is they're heading to Daystrom Station, and I have been assuming this entire time that they were going to the Daystrom Institute, the thing that was in season 1. I think that's in South Korea. This is clearly a starbase somewhere. It looked familiar. Maybe it even popped up in the Next Generation at some point. Or the upshot here is Starfleet Command is the only way that you can get inside of this, supposedly. But if Starfleet Command is compromised, we'll get to it. So they go to District 6 again, Raffi and Worf. And Raffi is very loud because that's what her character does in this season is yells. And Worf just gets on his knees like Qui-Gon because that's their dynamic, right? She's the Padawan. And then Worf says, a communications disruption can only mean one thing.
Invasion.
That's it. So we're back to the Titan and Starfleet arrives, the USS Intrepid. I'm not sure if that has any significance, but they send over a shuttle of security officers and everybody looks around and we know that's weird because Shaw says, that's strange. And it's clearly not Starfleet. What they're doing here is telling us, you should be worried about this. Picard tells Seven that he may have to ask her for one more favor. And we find out just a little later that is to hide Jack from the inquiry because feels like this is a little weird, because it is weird. We have another scene in the transporter. There is no blocking in the transporter. It's always just flat shots. I wonder if maybe it's even blue screen or green screen, people hanging out in the transporter. But Shaw is very happy that, again, I like Shaw, and he's basically dancing on the just dug graves of Picard and Riker. They're not so worried about it, which is okay. You know, they basically are thinking, well, it's just like old times. We figured it out before. Yeah. We'll do it again. 2 words for you, Bob. Mm-hmm. Ro Laren.
Yeah, and you told me to stay off the interwebs.
At some point, I thought, if you go on Twitter, somebody's going to ruin this.
Yeah, and I literally made it until right before the episode.
Oh,
no! And I was challenging myself. It was sort of like picking a scab. I basically doom scrolled all day and on and off. Like, I'm going to put it down right now. And I would, maybe 30 minutes later, let's see what they're screaming about on Twitter right now. And right before I scrolled past something, saw a shot. It was that first sort of 3 shot of Ro with the 2 security guards next to her walking down the hallway. And I scrolled past it and I went, I don't recognize that. But then my brain couldn't let it go. And I just sort of thought about it for a minute.
You figured it out without trying to figure it out.
Laren.
Yeah.
That's gotta be, what's her name? Michelle Phillips? Is that her name?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think you got it. Sometimes, but you called it playing the hits a couple of episodes ago. It feels to me like somebody watched all of The Next Generation, made a list of loose ends, and said, I would like to make a show called Star Trek Closure, and we'll just get around to all of that stuff. I want to talk about 2 things here.
All right.
First, I want to talk about reoccurring characters, or what I'm thinking of as the lost art of reoccurring characters. And then we should get into Ro Laren. Sound good?
Right. Yes.
So Ro Laren was a reoccurring character, for anybody who doesn't know, from The Next Generation. But I feel like reoccurring characters were something that was big in the 80s and 90s when we were growing up, right? Which is, this person does not belong to the cast proper, but once a season or so they show up. Doug Judy from Brooklyn Nine-Nine is a great example of that, where they just bring somebody in and then it's like, it's that episode. They're like the character equivalent of the annual Christmas episode.
Yeah, and I don't. Well, is this just a casualty of less episodic storytelling and shorter seasons?
The Firefly that we mentioned once before didn't last long enough to really, well, even though it only lasted 13 episodes and 10 of them were aired, they started the reoccurring character with that gangster whose name escapes me, the old guy on the space station. But like, they were trying to do that. It was a thing where, by God, the main cast is large enough in these shows. You don't need to add a 15th person, but sometimes it's nice to see them come back. And Ro Laren is, I don't know if it's appropriate to call her a fan favorite character, but she was certainly a favorite of mine. She was fun. And so I definitely started watching a couple of episodes of The Next Generation to think about this and try and, contextualize it properly. So you want to talk about Ro Laren? What do you remember?
I remember her showing up. I want to say it was around the 5th season.
Yep.
And she was on board during the 5th season. And then she shows up a few times later, I think.
She first appears in season 5, episode 3, Ensign Ro. Her last name is first because she's Bajoran. And the backstory here is that the Cardassians, who are bad guys, they're the How Many Lights Are There guys, if you know that one. They basically annexed the Bajoran homeworld, and her people are sort of scattered, homeless outsiders on many, many worlds. And at some point before this episode, there was some sort of serious incident, and Ensign Ro was court-martialed, and an admiral got her out of prison and assigned to the Enterprise to assist with a mission that takes place during this episode. And they're basically, I think, quelling a Bajoran terrorist uprising. in that episode, she beams over to the Enterprise where Riker's there to greet her, and the first thing he does is make her take off her Bajoran earring, which plays a part in this episode. But she's basically a rebel and a Shaw-esque character who's kind of a lovable pain.
Yeah.
In contrast to so many other characters who are just, do-gooders.
I recall at the time so I was watching TNG as it was being aired, and I recall at the time being excited by anything happening that was out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And it was just a breath of fresh air to have a new character who might be around, who just, wasn't the same 5 or 6 characters sort of standing around with the hum of the ship in the background.
Especially one on the crew, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So her last episode is called Preemptive Strike. It is I don't know if you can call it penultimate, since the final episode might have been All Good Things was 1 or 2 episodes. I don't remember if it was split, but she is in the last episode before the finale, which is pretty good placement for a character. If you're going to basically shut this down and they pick her as being there, it's pretty good. And the story of that episode is worth telling because it sets up, where they were in the same way that Beverly disappears for 20 years. And then we've got to tell the story of what happened in between. In contrast to that, we actually saw the last time that our characters laid eyes on Ro Laren. And that is, her and Picard have this relationship where he's basically a mentor to her. And she's taming her wild side, I guess, over several episodes, it's fair to say. And she returns to the Enterprise, and they're throwing a party for her because she's become a commander. And they come upon, the Enterprise is called upon to figure out a solution to a skirmish, because there are these people called the Maquis, and they're Maquis. These people called the Maquis, who are having a space battle. So the problem is, according to, I guess, Starfleet, possibly the Federation, possibly both, the skirmish between these two groups violates a peace treaty that they have with the Cardassians. So early in the episode, by the way, the Enterprise comes up in between this battle, and they detonate a photon torpedo in the middle of space to blow the warring ships back and off course, which is exactly what Riker and Picard did about 2 episodes ago in this. So I think that's where they got that, which is kind of cool.
Interesting.
So Starfleet wants Ro to infiltrate the Maquis, and Picard offers her the job. Ro says she wants to take it, in part to validate his faith in her. And I think the short version of a longer story is that Ro sympathizes with the people who are fighting the Cardassians because her backstory is her homeworld. They wrecked it. And she has this heart-to-heart with Picard in the episode, and he gives her sort of the option to back out. There's a scene toward the end of the episode which is right up to the line of almost romantic between those two. And Picard gives her the option to back out, but basically says, you do it, and you're going to be up for court-martial, and you're screwed.
Yeah.
Picard's so worried that she won't be able to go through with it that he sends Riker with her to finish the mission, and she holds up Riker with a phaser, beams off, and sort of lives with the Maquis. And it's her biggest regret seems to be, as Riker says, that she's disappointing Picard. But her whole thing is she had to follow her heart to do the right thing. And I think the episode's well written because there's a good argument for the right thing on either side. And Picard is getting a debrief from Riker at the end, and he basically just stares out into space and doesn't say anything. So he's obviously hurt. And then they end the show the next episode. So, that there was no resolution to that. But she sort of, you know what I mean when I say she sort of gets pride of place, as like they dedicated the last standalone episode of The Next Generation that wasn't the finale to her.
Yeah, that is, yeah. And what's funny about her character is she seems to be connected to both of those first 2 TNG spinoffs. So I don't know, again, what came first, chicken and the egg, but all that stuff with her and the Cardassians and the Bajorans, that was all set up in TNG, presumably to kick off Deep Space Nine, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, all of that stuff happened before Deep Space Nine started. In fact, I think when we first meet her, are the Cardassians still occupying Bajor?
Yeah.
Is that okay? So then, and I believe that her character was supposed to be the first officer of Deep Space Nine, but she didn't want. Yeah, and she didn't want to commit to the role. That's why we get another Bajoran as Sisko's first in command. They're very similar characters.
How about that?
You know, sort of angry Bajoran freedom fighters. And then the whole Maquis subplot that sets up Voyager. That was the whole idea, is that Voyager was chasing this Maquis ship and they get thrown, you know, across the galaxy.
Oh,
and then they need to work together. It's just one of those things about Voyager that never really worked out. You know, it could have been a very compelling storyline, like how do these terrorists integrate themselves into a Starfleet ship so they can get home, and it just turns into, you know, your bland monster of the week, basically. Yeah.
Sure. So back to the episode, back to the watch through. There is a scene between Jack and Seven, where she is hiding Jack and puts him in a Starfleet uniform, just like in the dream or the hallucination or the vision or the whatever. I don't know. Is he seeing it doesn't make any sense. I don't know. We'll find out soon. We get back into medical with Beverly, Ensign LaForge, that Trill doctor. LaForge pukes looking at herself because something that I sort of acknowledged, but certainly didn't say, and it didn't seem important enough at the time, last episode. That changeling that Seven shot didn't turn into a pile of goo and didn't turn in, and she didn't shoot him. I don't know what the phaser was turned to, but they made a pretty big point a few times in the season before this of turning changelings to ash or other things to ash. And that didn't happen, which is important because the changeling died and didn't revert to its liquid state. She cuts into it, Beverly does, with a space scalpel and waves a sort of a space light bulb near it, and is shocked to find out that there is no DNA, but there's plasma, which means it could pass a blood test. So the upshot here is the changeling situation has become much more complicated.
Yes. This reminds me of something that I maybe thought but didn't fully flesh out in my head last week. Oh, they're very careful to set up all these rules, but I was a little confused, and I guess it makes sense now because her body didn't liquefy or whatever. What was that phaser set to last week when Seven shot her? Because if it was set to some kind of a kill setting, it was very bold of Seven to just shoot her straight in the chest. Like, she could have stunned the girl, probably, correct?
Yeah, probably.
Maybe the stun setting doesn't work on changelings. Is there a difference between disintegrate and kill? You know, I don't have any idea.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if these rules were established somewhere. So now we cut back to Picard and Riker and Ro, who have unfinished business. You can go back right now and watch an episode of The Next Generation and know the exact moments that these characters last saw each other, and nothing has changed. It's kind of a neat... There isn't anything that happened between these three off screen, which is kind of a neat thing to happen.
Yeah.
She enters a room, takes care of a little business, saying that they're transporting most of the ship's crew to the Intrepid for reassignment. I'm pretty sure we're clearing out the decks for other episodes. And Riker's pissed off. He says, which is, I think he's totally right about this, because the way she's talking, it sounds like their guilt has already been predetermined. And Ro basically says, well, if you cooperate, something good might happen. And she says that they should refer to her as Commander, which occurs to me, having watched every episode multiple times like a crazy person, that keeps coming back. I'm not sure of the point of it. I'm just pointing out that it keeps coming back in this. In episode 1, like Picard tells Jack to refer to him as Admiral. She's doing it here. I mean, it might be meaningful. It might just be exactly what the most obvious and straightforward thing is, that, you know, Ro is asserting her authority. She's not, don't treat me like an ensign or a lieutenant or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So Riker and her 2 security officers exit the room. Ro and Picard remain, and Picard notices that she's not wearing her earring. She cuts herself to prove herself to Picard, although that doesn't necessarily work because of what Beverly just said in the preceding scene.
Yeah, they were clearly trying to play up the fact that perhaps she's a changeling.
Right. And she said, let's talk about your son. So speaking of Jack, cut to Jack dressed, wearing a Starfleet uniform, having a vision. The vision says, find me, hear me, connect them, connect us. It's clearly to me Beverly's voice. Not sure what it means. He has more hallucinations in the transporter room. There are these red, what I'm going to call roots or whatever, growing over people or inside of the transporter beam, I don't know, energy. At one point he says he wants to go anywhere as long as it's not a Starfleet ship. It kills the transporter guy, but that was a hallucination. So it's not going great for Jack, I would say. We wind up back in District, 6, Metalis Prime, Worfy. It's Worf and Rafi together.
That's good.
Rafi's a hologram, it turns out.
It's like Benifer.
There you go. Rafi's a hologram, and Kryn gets the drop on him. Hey, Kryn is another 12 Monkeys alumni. This is what happens when your old showrunner gets a new show. He brings back his buddy. He's got that. He's unmistakably smoky voice. That dude, I should watch 12 Monkeys is what I'm saying. Kryn's a Vulcan. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Is this the first? I don't know. The show's been on now for 60 years. Is this the first time there's a Vulcan villain?
I think I asked that question in my notes later, but yeah, I think it might be.
Well, what did your damn notes say, Dave?
It said, "Why is the nice guy isn't a nice?"
No,
anymore.
what was
it says, have we ever seen a bad Klingon before? I appreciate his use of logic, another example of it, an at least they cared moment. In other words, I think this might be the first one, and then somebody said let's assume that's true. Somebody in the writer's room said, well, why make him a Klingon? Like, aren't Klingons, oh my God, I did it again. I've been saying Klingon this entire time.
Instead of Vulcan? No, I think you've been... All right, you ready? Hang on. No one's going to hear this part. Yeah. Don't use this part, okay?
Yeah, okay.
Just say Vulcan. I'm sorry. Just say Klingon.
Klingon.
Damn it. Just say Vulcan in a variety of different inflections. Go.
Vulcan.
Now, wait. Give me one where you've just found your son murdered.
Vulcan!
There you go. Good.
So, have we ever seen a bad Vulcan before? What is it between Klingon and Vulcan? I did it the last episode. Somebody in the room said, y'all, if we're making him a Vulcan, does he not have to be a weird logic slave, blah, blah, blah? And they have a bit of dialogue a little later where he says it's actually logical to be a criminal underlord. And it works for me.
I thought it was interesting.
Somebody said, we can't just paper over this. We have to have an explanation, and they did it pretty tidily, I thought.
I mean, there was Cybok in Star Trek V, everyone's favorite movie, but he was sort of a avuncular.
What does God need with a starship?
He was very jolly almost, just sort of goofy and having. I mean, he's sort of a cult leader figure, but he has sort of fun doing what he's doing. He's not necessarily, cruel or mean.
Right.
Yeah. But this may be the first Vulcan who is sort of a villain.
Which is, I think, an interesting way to explore that, how that would work.
Yeah.
So we get another scene where Beverly's talking about changelings. This is important. We're going to talk about this very soon, but these are not a new species. These are evolved changelings. And the upshot is they could be anywhere. They could be anyone. We would never know. They can replicate internal organs, She says only under intense dissection does the tissue revert to its natural gooey state. And I think that's probably foreshadowing. But this is like, you thought changelings were dangerous before. Well, now it's way worse.
These are not your father's changelings.
Oh, that's true. My dad did have several changelings.
Yeah.
Picard and Ro, she wants to know about Jack. Beverly calls at this point, and she sends him the secret message that they put on a very large wall so that nobody could read. And it says, changelings can pass the blood test, capabilities beyond superficial. Trust no one. We're going to get to trust a little later too, Bob. But here's the thing. Picard lies about the changelings, says they don't know anything. Ro wants to see the corpse. Again, as you said earlier, we are meant to suspect Ro. We don't know why she's so everybody's interested in Jack, and we have no idea why. I don't know how she knows. I don't know. Like, Picard, I think, points out at this point that, or at least some point very soon, that it's the only person she's asking about is Jack. There is this is not the first time that somebody, including Picard, has said something to the effect of, the person I know would never do X. Like when Picard was interviewing or interrogating, I guess, Jack when he was in space jail, and he said, the Beverly I know would never do that. And Jack was like, well, you don't, when was the last time you saw her? And Picard's pulling that again, learning the lesson again, which is, you wouldn't do that. And she basically says, you don't know me. I think this is an interesting thing, because this is a show that picks up after 20 years of the last story directly relating to a lot of these people. And there's a real question about how and whether and how much people change over time. But I think it might honestly be a little bit of clever commentary from the writers, like maybe saying something like, we can't exactly pick up where we left off. And Picard's trying to do that, and it's a mistake to do that. Things happen. So it's, in other words, I'm thinking personal evolution, but thematic evolution too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Ro tells the story of how she got back into Starfleet. She said she spent years with the Maquis, turned herself into Starfleet, got court-martialed, not for the first time, Bob, as we learned. She went back to prison. They took her out of prison. She was recruited into Starfleet. Does this sound familiar?
Yeah. So, okay. Is this just the exact same? Yes.
I believe so.
Okay,
yes.
Okay.
Which, I mean, worked once, it could work again.
Yeah.
But this time it was recruited, she says, into Starfleet intelligence. They put her into an arduous rehabilitation program. She proved herself and once again worked her way up slowly. I mean, that's 30 years of backstory in about 4.5 sentences. It's pretty good. They didn't reinvent the wheel here, but it worked before, it works now. Picard is still smarting from his betrayal 30 years ago. He said, why did you join the enemy? Why did you betray your honor? And she says, my honor? Or do you mean Starfleet's? Blind faith in any institution does not make one honorable. That is kind of the whole episode in a nutshell, because Picard you have to convince Picard to say that Starfleet is bad or has gone bad at a certain point. And thematically, her backstory is showing that you can't just put blind faith in an institution, right?
Yeah.
We get a brief shot of those two changeling. We don't know they're changelings, but the security guards walking intently down the hallway. I assume this is what you look like walking around the office when you don't want people to bother you.
Yes. For everyone listening, conjure in your head, if you will, my signature move, which is called the important walk.
Okay.
Which is, you have to usually be carrying something. You need, some kind of business.
A prop?
Yeah, you need to be carrying something. You need some kind of business, and you need to appear to be moving somewhere with intent, purpose, like very purposefully. You need to be going somewhere. You don't really look angry, but you certainly look you're sort of concentrating. You're walking sort of fast, and you're carrying something like a tripod head or like an overhead projector, something, and you're just walking.
And the upshot is nobody bothers you because you look busy and important.
Yes.
Ro wants to move the meeting into the holodeck, Bob, and where are we back at?
10 forward.
Guinan's bar, 10 forward. Safety protocols, LA, circa 2020. Well, I don't know, circa any point at any. Who
certain 2020.
The one that looks more like a bar that you could go to today in the real world than the one that was on the Enterprise D.
Yes.
Picard turns the safety protocols off, so that means things can hurt. He pulls a gun on her.
Very convenient that there's the Picard authorization safety protocol button.
Yeah, you don't even have to say anything. There. There's just a safety protocol button. That's how bars work.
What if that's there simply so that the alcohol, the holographically generated alcohol,
into real alcohol,
actual alcohol?
You've just invented the world's greatest headcanon.
Yes.
That's amazing. I love it. That's amazing. Picard distracts her by putting on music. The jukebox lights up, and they pull gun.
Wait, how did he do that?
She says the walls here are thin.
Yeah, and put on some music.
He goes, okay, computer music. The jukebox lights up along the wall. She turns over, which is exactly long enough for him to pull out a phaser on her or a gun. Hey, you know what else that they've changed in New Star Trek, which is slightly surprising to me? It's that the phasers in the Next Generation looked like plastic props called phasers, and now phasers very much look like guns in New Star Trek, and I actually think that's probably better because it just the visual language of a gun it tells a lot of the story.
Yeah, if I'm recalling correctly, there was a lot of sort of mockery of the guns in TNG when it came out. They looked sort of like Dustbusters or something.
They do.
Yeah, they're bizarre sort of.
I spit my coffee. I was away from Mike trying to quietly drink coffee. I've got to clean it up. Go ahead.
I've been thinking a lot about the phasers, Dave.
Oh, please tell me more.
So, as you know, I think about phasers, and I want to say I saw a post on Twitter where someone showed a phaser being used in this series that looked kind of like a classic phaser from TOS, which was the really cool kind where you have sort of the little phaser type 1, the little sort of handheld one that you would then click into the pistol, and it becomes like a phaser type 2, and it's that cool TOS pistol phaser. And then I started seeing these close-ups. It was the one last week that Seven shot the Changeling with, and the one that Ro and Picard are pointing at each other. And this one, they don't look like that. But I think Jack does have that classic phaser. So I think that we have multiple phasers, and all of them are cool.
There's a really great little scene here where they're doing the thing that Shaw talked about before, which is how do you find out if somebody's really a changeling? Because as you pointed out a few minutes ago, her cutting herself proves nothing. And we as the audience know that. So how do they diffuse that, and how do they both decide? Now, neither of them necessarily know about the blood thing, but we do. So how do they change that in our eyes as the viewers? And they do what Shaw said you have to do, which is essentially have a conversation about things nobody else would know about. And Picard is pissed. He said he's been rehearsing the conversation for 30 years. She says, she's pissed at him too. She criticizes his relentless judgment, but he defends that and says it was a bond based on mutual respect, based on, he sort of stammers over that. You and I think that's directly like they could have been an item if they wanted to, I think. He says, you betrayed everything I believed in. And then she says, you wanted to mold me in your image, your mentorship, your affection. It was conditional. And you dare to question my honor. I joined the Maquis because belonging there meant standing up to injustice, which, having, by the way, Bob, just watched that episode, absolutely right. The person who wrote this got it right. He said, even if it meant betraying your beloved Starfleet. Hey, that's also foreshadowing, Bob.
Yeah.
She said, that was me. But you could never understand that because you confuse morality with duty. And that, Admiral, is your dishonor. He says, I believed in you. So he's not really, I think, hearing her at this exact moment, but still, she said, only when it was easy for you, if it meant so much, you would have understood. That is foreshadowing for the end of the episode. And then Picard says, you broke my heart and they drop their guns. She says, and you broke mine. And then Picard says, well, if that pain tells us anything, it's that we are who we say we are. So that's for each other, but smartly also for the audience.
You know, I may have enjoyed this episode more if I had watched that penultimate episode of TNG. And I almost wonder if they miss a trick by trying to just get you that momentary surprise of seeing that character, which is cool. But I think most people would have enjoyed the episode more had they reviewed that one again.
Yeah, they wanted the surprise of Ro Laren walking onto the Titan. Onto the plot, Ro Laren says, Starfleet is compromised at the highest level. Jean-Luc, I need you to tell me right now, do you trust me? And he says, yes. We're going to get to trust in a moment. At this point, she doesn't even trust transporters, she says. Boy, does this sound like Conspiracy, the episode you were talking about at the very beginning, doesn't it?
It does, and I wonder if we're going to be looping back into that at any point, or if it was just sort of the window dressing of Conspiracy, or if those actual aliens are... Because everybody seemed to say, watch that episode.
It doesn't have to be bugs, but they are certainly using the conspiracy. They're setting up
this
that
sort of
conspiracy.
paranoia.
Right. With that. At this point, I started thinking, one of the things that I have hated the most about this Picard revival was in season 1, where they basically made Starfleet terrible. The parts of Starfleet that we saw were gross and angry and sweary, bore a passing resemblance to what I knew and loved about Starfleet. It's possible, I'm just going to plant a seed here, Bob. It's possible that I could feel mildly better about that if season 3 of Picard can explain why Starfleet wasn't like Starfleet.
That's a very good point. You're saying maybe this goes back farther than just the beginning of season 3.
I don't know if George Lucas figured out who Luke's father was at the beginning, but he figured it out somewhere along the way and made it really interesting.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought that, I'll give you an example of a thing I really don't care about. I thought Prometheus, the movie that's in the Alien franchise, I thought that was an unmitigated disaster. I really just thought it was a bad movie. And then I saw Alien Covenant, because I guess that's what I do, is I like to see sequels to things I don't like. And I wouldn't say I loved Alien Covenant, but they really sort of doubled down on the story in Prometheus and made it retroactively better. I'm wondering if we're just, I do not believe, until proven otherwise, my belief is they just put the right people or the guy in charge of this season to make this, and he figured out a way to do this. I'm not saying I think it's planned, because I don't want to give, honestly, the people behind the terrible seasons 1 and 2 any credit for some sort of grand design. But I think thematically, it's possible, we'll see, he might actually be retroactively making seasons 1 and 2 less bad.
That's fascinating. Actually, I had never considered that.
That's Spock says that word a lot. Fascinating. So I know Star Trek, and now you know that I know Star Trek.
Yeah.
Back to the watch through. There's Worf and Rafi and Quinn, and we find out here that there's a theme about family again. We talked about that last time, but Quinn and the dead Ferengi, who was the other lead actor from 12 Monkeys, they were essentially fake family, because that's a theme, right? And we learned that Quinn facilitated the break-in at the Daystrom Station, or at Daystrom Station, I guess. And he corners Rafi and Worf into a fight to the death. Worf got stabbed, and my note is straight up, the f***. In other words, I believed it.
You believed that he was going to die?
I thought they were actually killing him. I did. They gave me...
I did not, because there's already scenes in the
gullible.
Trailer. Yeah.
See? Do you see, Bob? Stop watching the damn trailers.
But don't you just loathe the fake death, fake out thing?
Yes. but I believed it because I'm a gullible dum-dum. He gives today was a good day to die. You were a warrior, which is a thing that Worf would say. He says, you are a warrior, which harkens back to, I cut this out of an earlier episode because when I told you that I figured out it was Worf behind the texts in like episode 1, you then told me that the entire internet had figured it out and it was like a 3-minute conversation about nothing.
Yeah.
But he did text her earlier, you are a warrior, or something to that effect.
Do not seek anger, do not seek blame.
And he does that. It's an echo of what he says earlier, which is nice. And then Worf goes down.
All right, so Worf's now dead.
Well,
Worf was one of my favorite characters. I guess we're just all We're just all going to have to move forward.
We'll be all right, I think.
Yeah.
We see the changelings once again. They croak like those bird mask people on the Shrike. So we're just getting a little bit of stuff here.
So hang on. So break that down. How are they dying like those characters?
They're croaking. Oh, sorry. Croaking as in making the sound, not dying.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
It's twice I've used a word that was ambiguous enough to confuse you. You're welcome.
Okay.
Picard and Ro are talking about this changeling problem. Ro has no idea how the changelings have done what they've done, but her theory is they've infiltrated the highest levels of Starfleet. They talk about the Frontier Day plans, Bob. We'll talk about this in the speculation segment. All of this buildup is making it better and better to me. She says there have been 12 incidents of changeling chicanery throughout the fleet. They're just keeping it quiet. She's connecting the dots, and Starfleet insisted that she get Jack. That answers the question earlier. Why was she so obsessed with Jack? And essentially nothing she is doing is working to try to get around the infiltration. I think this is the point. Oh yeah, Picard says he wants to contact Admiral Janeway or Chancellor Roll. I have no idea who Chancellor Roll is. I don't even know what a Chancellor is in the context of Star Trek, but I sure do know who Admiral Janeway is. And
yeah,
boy, if all of the ships are going to be there on Fleet Day, but and the Admiral Janeway and all of the crew and they're not just going to. We'll talk about that later.
All right.
Do you want to explain to me the difference between Starfleet and the Federation? Just to be clear.
So the United Federation of Planets, I'm assuming is like the United States of America, and the various planets and colonies and space stations. These are all sort of states in a grand sort of federated
space UN sort of thing?
Well,
or
maybe,
more...
but almost implies more like America. I would almost like a federation implies like federal, right?
Yeah.
And Starfleet is like the U.S. Navy.
So
it's the military and exploration
wing
of the Federation.
There you go. Okay. Thank you. We get back to Raffi and Kryn and Worf. They definitely verify that Worf is dead. So I was right.
I can't believe they killed Worf.
I know. Honestly, it's crazy. Hang on a sec, though, because at this point, Kryn tries to use Raffi's family as leverage to basically make her work for him now. This is more like in that one line, it's more than they did with Raffi's family in all of Picard seasons before this. It was a nice use of saying you have an ex-husband who appeared, by the way, in a previous episode, a son and a little baby grandchild, right? So it's actually a nice use of that thing that had previously gone nowhere in other seasons. The lights go out. Worf comes back.
Oh.
It turns out he had learned how to regulate his heart rate. You know.
I can be stabbed and die and then spontaneously come back to life.
Are you going to sit here and tell me that Mr. Worf can't do that? Is that your position, Bob?
So Worf gets stabbed and he falls down and then regulates his heartbeat so that for the 10 seconds that someone tries to take his pulse, he appears to be dead.
Yes.
That's like ninja level stuff.
Yeah, he's really good, Bob.
All right, okay.
He's a good space ninja.
All right.
Kryn explains that Daystrom Station, reinforcing what we learned earlier, is guarded by a highly sophisticated AI system, but it has flaws that are most, illogical. It's good. So he brokered for a device that exploits that, and without that device, nobody can get in. And Rafi says, and you'll give us that device. And he says that would be logical. I like it.
Yeah.
If you're going to make a Vulcan, not a Klingon, but a Vulcan, a bad guy, what does a logical bad guy do? I think it's pretty clever.
Yeah.
So Picard and Ro are back together, and they want to figure out whether the crew is loyal. Basically, Ro's advice is, not even basically, Ro's advice is take the loyal crew, and run. Ro's out of here. She says she's leaving, and the changelings approach. They exchange. There's an exchange here, and Ro says, Ensign Ro, Lieutenant Ro, Captain Ro says, I wish just once that you could look into my heart, this is to Picard, and understand that I only did what I thought was best. Again, that tracks perfectly with the episode that I just watched. All these years that I'd wish you'd known me, and then I'd known you. It's kind of nice. Goodbye, Admiral. And she's got tears in her eyes, and it becomes clear to me at this point that she's toast.
Yeah.
That's just good storytelling logic. But I'm not upset that I figured that out, because I don't think it takes a mental giant to figure that out. The way I figured it out was that they were giving her a proper goodbye. No tar monster here.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yes.
That's a Tasha Yar reference. And they exchanged something which later, which we learn is actually her earring. That will become significant later. So Picard takes the information that he's had and brings it to Riker and Seven and Shaw and says, we've got to run. Shaw just wants to arrest Picard, which, the reason I like Shaw is that's not a crazy thing to do. He's not just cantankerous. Like, why would you trust this guy from Shaw's perspective,
Yeah.
And Riker overrules, says belay that, which is, again, every time Jonathan Frakes uses dad voice, I love it.
Belay that order.
That's it.
Red alert.
And Picard says, please, you must trust me. And this was this episode's light bulb moment for me, which is, this is an episode, maybe even a show, honestly, about trust, about who we trust, why we trust, how we trust. Do you trust me is what Ro asks Picard earlier. Picard just said to Shaw that he must trust him. Riker says that Picard trusted Ro when no one else would. They were having a conversation about that before Ro walked into the room earlier. And the answer to when and why and how you trust is often truth and emotions. Like the heart to heart between Ro and Picard is what brought trust. The real Ensign LaForge cares for Seven and calls her Seven, right? Mm. And it was that lack of caring as much as the knowledge that led to the dead changeling. Like that, she didn't trust that person. I think it's honestly, I realized that, and I thought this is a series wide leitmotif, right? What was Beverly's order, advice, whatever to Picard in her episode 1 distress call, and then
Trust
echoed again
no
today,
one, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So God knows Shaw hasn't trusted Picard from moment 1. Ro doesn't even, as I said earlier, trust transporters. This is a core of, I was going to say human, but it's not always human. A core of relationships here is about trust and how and why. Picard and Riker not trusting each other and bickering. It's everywhere. And it's got to be at least 4 or 5 places in this episode.
And, this scene, as I was watching it at the very end, where they are starting to disagree, Riker, Picard, and Shaw on the bridge, it did not bump me the way Picard and Riker sort of bickering throughout that entire episode did.
Yeah.
And I'm not 100% sure why. This seems much more sort of natural to the story.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's better, frankly.
Yeah.
It makes more sense. I titled this section in my notes, Ro's Noble End, which is a reference to a track on the episode 1 soundtrack, which came out before the movie, but that track was called...
The Phantom Menace.
Yes, episode 1. Dang, I did it again. So I called this section Ro's Noble End, which is a reference to episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and a track on its soundtrack. Bob, the soundtrack came out before The Phantom Menace did, and I was working at Barnes & Noble. I was working at Barnes & Noble at the time, and I went and I picked up the soundtrack and turned it around. And what did I read before the first Star Wars movie?
The Death of Qui-Gon.
Qui-Gon's Noble End. Oh, womp womp.
Well, I just to remind you, and I've already said this in our conversations, they literally had the Enterprise blowing up in the commercials for Star Trek 3.
Yes.
Like,
it's
totally
impossible.
unambiguous,
Sure.
blowing all of the greatest shots just right there.
So Ro is on the, now I guess we know why they didn't transport her over. Ro is on the shuttlecraft on her way back to the Intrepid. The changeling security guards behind her plant the same sort of ticking time bomb that the changeling used on the Titan in a previous episode. The bad guys beam to the Titan, I think. Yeah, has to be. The bad guys beam away. Transport from the shuttle is now inhibited. That's at least the third time they've done that in this series. And she disables. She knows. Essentially, she knows it can't. There's no way out of it for her at this point, is what she knows. And so, she decides to target the Intrepid's nacelle.
Very good.
And she has a hero's death, and I got covered in goosebumps. I thought, like, what a way to resurrect a character for one episode and give them an amazing send-off. It's very, like, there's an argument to be made that sort of a Joss Whedon, I might say, argument, which is death is senseless and pointless, and who cares, and sometimes just the nicest guy gets impaled by something and they're dead. But authors sometimes get to make this kind of thing too, which is, well, we're going to send Ro off in a way fitting for her character, I think.
A blaze of glory.
There you go. So at this point, the Intrepid demands that the Titan surrender. There's this very menacing shot of this limping spacecraft righting itself. And Riker says, "Don't you get it?" Because that's how people talk in real life. They say to other human beings, "Don't you get it?" It's a screenplay logic from a screenplay book I read in 1998.
Or what were some of those other bad lines of dialogue? Let me get this straight.
That's it. That's the other one. Nobody says that in real life. The only people who say that are people in movies who need to do exposition, or TV shows, obviously. So he goes, "Don't you get it? We're being framed for what just happened. The changelings masquerading as officers aboard that ship. Shaw doesn't know what to do, and Riker says, Captain Shaw, Liam, if you still can't trust us, fine. At least trust your own eyes." So at this point, Shaw has no choice. Most of the Titan crew at this point is on the Intrepid anyway. We cut to Jack and the changelings, the two changelings that killed Ro, find Jack in a hallway. Two more beam down in back of them. Hey, remember when Ro said she didn't trust transporters? It's pretty good, actually. I like that. It's foreshadowing that doesn't even look a little bit like foreshadowing to me. He has a vision and kills them all. This was reminiscent of, to me, the beginning of season 1 of Picard, where Soji or Daj or whoever it was
goes into
activated.
Ninja mode.
Yeah.
And the red stuff with Jack's vision is dangerously close to that Red Angel stuff from season 2 of Discovery.
That's true. Red is clearly a thing, right? You're right. The Red Angel is in Discovery. There's the Red Lady that was the statue that led them to the thing that led Rafi in season 1. So I don't know what red means. Something more than
all of the best foods are red.
Beets,
pasta sauce,
borscht,
rare steaks, pizza,
apples.
Yep, there you go.
And so they warp away. Riker says they're coming for us. Shaw says, yeah, but who exactly? And Riker's answer is everyone, which is exciting. So Starfleet bad coming after the good guys. The one non-compromised ship, as far as we can tell.
Yeah.
There's a nice scene where I think it's in the ready room, is what you would call that. And,
the conference room.
The conference room. I get confused about these things.
The ready room was, okay, picture that you're on the Enterprise D and you're looking at the view screen.
I am. To the left.
And Data's sitting in the left front console there, right? Immediately to the left of Data, there are 2 doors. One goes to a turbo lift. The other goes to Picard's ready room, which is the room where he has a little window and his desk, and he can,
it's like his office.
Earl Grey hot. Yes, exactly. And there's the painting of the Enterprise D. Riker will come in and sort of step over the chair before he sits down, right?
Yes.
But the conference room is on the rear of the bridge.
Got it. Okay. So this is in the conference room, the place with the conference
with the
table.
Windows. Mm-hmm. With the big wall of windows.
And and Riker says, "I'm sorry. I know what she meant to you." And Picard said, "No, well, I don't think you do. I don't even think I did." which is that's again a good death, and there's some growth here. They were able to work it out at the very end, which is nice. And we find out at this point that the Bajoran earring is in fact hiding a data chip, which was her entire investigation into the evils of Starfleet, not the Federation. Riker says she died for this. And then they unencrypt it and find out that she was Worf's source. So in the same way that Worf was Rafi's, Ensign Ro was
handler.
Worf's. Yes.
Yeah.
And they have a nice little reunion there.
Did you notice the scene where Worf's face pops up on the screen there is a little reminiscent of All Good Things in the future when they go find a screen grab of that where so All Good Things is in 3 different time periods. Picard taking over the Enterprise D, the current day, which was 7th season TNG, and then the future, right? It was like 25 years in the future.
Uh-huh.
There's a part where they have to contact Worf, because they're all estranged, and it's very, very similar shot.
Oh, nice. Well done, Star Trek makers.
Before we go on, I have a crazy wish.
Go ahead.
About All Good Things. They have the whole cast together. What a treat it would have been if, let's say they budget for 11 episodes versus 10, and they simply reshot the future scenes of All Good. How fascinating would that be?
Yeah, that'd be great. They should do that. Do you have their number?
I think we could find it.
Okay. We end with Beverly and Jack in sickbay. Shaw compliments Jack's shooting, which is slightly out of character, but not entirely.
Nice shooting, Tex.
There you go. And Beverly knows there's something wrong with her kid, so she takes a moment alone with him. She said, "How did you know they were all changelings?" He said, "I didn't. I think there's something very wrong with me." And he starts crying, and I thought to myself, damn it, I have to wait another week. This show is a grand slam at this point for me, Bob. We started our first episode. I laid out where I was, and I was at a point where I thought I was slightly depressed by the first 2 seasons, and I thought there is at least hope.
Slightly.
Well, I mean, I didn't let it carry on in my day-to-day life and mope around. But we've talked a lot about how we didn't like the first couple of seasons. And I thought there was the potential for this season to right some wrongs, but I wouldn't allow myself to get particularly excited because I didn't want to be let down again. Had I let myself get excited, I couldn't have been as excited as I am now. I wouldn't have dreamed that I woke up I kid you not, at 5:30 a.m. on Thursday, and my brain did that dumb morning brain thing where it just went, hey, I'd like to start thinking now. And it doesn't happen to me all the time. It doesn't happen to me almost ever. It's dark outside. The light isn't waking me up. But the first thought in my head is, hey, it's Picard Day. And I swear to you, I did not fall back asleep and then eventually rolled out of bed and thought, let's do this. Let's go watch it and take notes. That's how far this thing's got its hooks into me.
Well, you know what?
What?
I mean, yeah, I guess this is just how the universe works. Occasionally, accidentally, something good happens.
Yeah, it did. I didn't think, I thought it could be good. I didn't think I would so much look forward to this you know what I'll say? I say all of that to say this. I know how much fun I'm having, and I am noticing it and making sure that I acknowledge how cool this 10 weeks is. You know?
Yeah, this is definitely something nice, yeah.
Yep. You want to do some speculation?
All right, let's go for it. Do it.
All right. I thought about this when I was rewatching the episodes this week. Picard says in one of his stories last episode that Worf set a deadfall trap and the hunter became the prey. I'll bet you that is future episode setup. Again, I think at this point, I think the writers are probably good enough to have inserted that line of dialogue to set up something that hasn't happened yet in this series, but not within the episode. Frontier Day is exactly what you thought it was going to be, which is an excuse to get all of the ships in one place at one time. And as we learned in this episode pretty explicitly, a great place for terrorists to show up and then blow everything up.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It occurred to me at this point that this scene, the only word I have is a cliche, and it's still the best word, which is this: whatever's going to happen is going to be epic. Like, I think they're all going to have to spring into action. Here's my guess. I think the Janeway setup here is to put her on Voyager and this scene on the starship. And this season is going so well that at this point, I think I would be surprised if this wasn't a culmination of the Next Generation. I'll bet you they start getting guest appearances from other crew members, on these things. Like, I'll bet you we're not just crossing over changelings from DS9. Like, I think we'll have the Voyager crew on Voyager. Why wouldn't they be there? We already know that all of the old heroes are given speeches and things like that. Like, I think this is good. I have now talked myself into the hype that I refused to talk myself into before.
So maybe this is going to be sort of a grand finale of that whole 90s Trek Berman era.
Against the backdrop that I said a couple episodes ago that nobody expected Nemesis to be the last TNG movie. I'm not sure that's right in hindsight. I think they might have done that, or might have thought that was going to be the deal. But I have the sense, based on just watching the show, that at least one motivating idea was, what if this is the last time we can get everybody together? What do we want to do? Right? Like, don't assume. It may be that we live in a world where this is such a friggin' grand slam that they will do more. Right? We talked about that before, where I think Patrick Stewart was like, hey, maybe this isn't the last thing we do together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But like, I think they went in to make this and say, if we don't roll another frame of film on the Next Generation cast, how do we go out in style and not like dour and depressing in Nemesis? And so I'm just starting, my imagination is going wild, despite that I'm not trying to even think about what the future is.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at the very least, I'm hoping we're going to see some old ships. I don't know how active all of them will be, but I'm assuming we're going to see a lot of old ships. I'm pretty sure at this point, again, I don't know anything specific, but just everybody's sort of suspecting there will be some Galaxy class Enterprise D business going. Not sure how that works. They did mention the saucer crashing. Maybe, I'm assuming the saucer could be salvaged. Maybe they just put it on another star drive or something. I don't know.
Why have a museum if you're not trying to preserve it or something to that effect?
It seems likely that they will end up on an Enterprise D.
We're not just going to have generations of starships. We're going to have series crossing generations of starships that are all...
Well, that's the hope.
Yeah. I won't be disappointed if my prediction isn't correct, because it's ridiculous to write my own story and pretend like if they don't do exactly what I wanted, then it's a disappointment. But I don't think this is a small exit.
So then what, it is a little concerning to me because there's only 5 episodes left. I don't even quite understand the legalities of, there's all these theories about like what, there was the CBS split off from Paramount and who owns what. And do all these post 2009 shows have to be a certain percentage different from what came before? That a lot of people say that that's true. What happened? And a lot of what we're enjoying about Picard is the nostalgia factor here, which is working in this case, I think. Yeah. It's not just member berries for some reason, and I can't quite articulate why.
Well, I think first of all, if you like it, it seems less like a member berry.
Yeah.
Just to be human about it. But second of all, if it's done well, if it's not done cynically or poorly, and I really think these watch throughs, I think are mostly a testament to the people who are writing and putting the show together thoughtfully. So I think that's probably a reason why. Like, we have seen people resurrect old characters and old franchises and do it middlingly or poorly. Yeah. There's 2 seasons of Picard where they just said this guy is Jean-Luc Picard and he didn't really seem like Jean-Luc Picard to me. Right? That's the thing I said about the prequel trilogy in Star Wars. At no point did C-3PO open his mouth and make me go like, hey, man, that's not C-3PO. He doesn't talk like that. Like, they got that right. It was the other people who they may have screwed up. They didn't may have screwed up, who I think they did screw up, right? And I feel like when Riker talks, he sounds like Riker. Not just in voice, but he's acting like Riker. Picard seems more like Picard in this season than the weirdo he was playing, who was supposed to be Picard in the other seasons. And they wrote a story where they said, what is Frontier Day if not an excuse to put all of these things together? But they didn't. But they're building up to it. They have we know why they didn't just make Federation Day. As I think, practically speaking, they did invent Federation Day to get to get this big ending worked up and all of these ships and stuff together. But they're teasing it out and making it part of a larger story. They didn't just throw it in there and said, because the script called for it. Like, they're doing the work.
They're earning it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
every week.
now that we're halfway through and I'm definitely getting greedy, what happens beyond this then? Is this sort of the springboard for Trek to continue, or is this just a delightful anomaly?
A delightful anomaly is my guess. Although, however, I can only assume, because I don't look at these things, that this is a wild success for Paramount Plus. What I wanted them to do 3-4 years ago when Anson Mount as Captain Pike was on Discovery was back up a dump truck full of $100 bills to the actor's house and say, please, we need you to do a series. And what I strongly suspect is that this is a wild success. They knew it even before it came out, and that there are several dump trucks. I don't know. And by the way, I don't think anything can be this good. Again, this is lightning in a bottle that we are watching happen in real time. But I will bet you that somebody is going to try and replicate this again.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, maybe, I don't know that it is that hard to replicate. I mean, surely, think of the Trek films of the 80s. I mean, we got Star Trek 6, 4, 2, 3. Those are numbers in some kind of order. But I mean, those are all good.
I think they could do it. Well, what if this is the way? There's a thing. I think there's quick conversation to be had because about like Star Trek as TV show versus Star Trek as movie. And when I was a kid, my dad, I would not call him into science fiction, but he definitely watched Star Trek reruns when they were on. That's about the only science fiction I know he was definitely into. And I would watch those with him. But at least when I was a kid, my Star Trek fandom, I guess, journey began, or really like deepened, maybe is the better way to say it, with the movies. And I was more of a movie guy. And there are people who are definitely Star Trek fans, totally understandably, who are like, Star Trek is a television show that happens to have movies. Yeah. And I was the guy who fell in love with the movies and then sort of backed in later on with The Next Generation into the TV show. I don't think it's a binary thing, but I wonder if the future is maybe a hybrid model where essentially what you said in a previous episode is true, which is this is essentially a 10-part, 9-hour movie.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that every Next Generation movie was bad, but they weren't great. The idea was to stop the weekly television series and then transition into infinity, making movies with the same cast. Like that was the plan, and it didn't work out great. They had done it pretty well with the original series cast. They were going to try and replicate that with the Next Generation, and it just didn't really work out.
Yeah.
But this in 2023, it used to be that there was a binary. Like TV is cheap and okay, and like, I don't know, there were miniseries at certain points, but even that went away. And the really big, huge cinematic stuff was on the silver screen and only there. And now, like I keep saying, TV is movies. Or at least the production quality of this thing is way off the charts.
Well, there's a lot of speculation about how small the budget is, but it's funny because what is a low budget today ain't what it used to be.
Yeah.
Because maybe maybe that's why we're always using 10 forward. We're basically stuck inside the Titan, but all those things are fine. And maybe it just comes down to, like I said, there's a lot of scenes where people are talking back and forth to each other, but
yeah,
it's still shot like a movie. It's shot in, CinemaScope, and the sets are amazing when you can see them.
Yeah. Well, I think we did it. We figured out what the future of Star Trek is, and we should just basically close down the podcast forever.
Yep. Done.
All right. Well, I will see you back here next week. I'll beam in to this podcast and, just remember what I said about that communications disruption.
Invasion.
Until then, be mindful of the living force, Bob.
Farewell.